Welcome to the Politics and Media Show with me, John Rees. Somalia has long been regarded as the definition of a failed state. The East African country has been without central authority for decades, and for many years international efforts of bringing stability to the country have floundered. In recent years, the Western-backed transitional government has fought an internal conflict with the Al-Shabaab group, while the country has suffered with a major famine. But the UK is now trying to take a lead internationally on tackling Somalia's problems. International Development Secretary Andrew Mitchell says more needs to be done to address the underlying causes of instability in Somalia. Mitchell says that without a stronger approach, the country would continue to decline and could fall back into famine. Now, before I introduce this week's guest, let's take a more detailed look at what the UK is proposing.
Conflict and famine have plagued Somalia in recent years. Despite regional and international efforts, the country remains without an effective functioning central government. Only anarchy has truly ruled. For years, the weak Western-backed government, which operates out of Mogadishu but struggles to control much of the rest of the country, has battled with fighters of Al-Shabaab, an Islamic group which wants to introduce Sharia law to Somalia. Thousands have been killed in the violence, while a severe drought caused one of Somalia's worst famines of recent times. The UN has just declared that the famine has now ended, but says conditions remain fragile and could worsen. Now the UK wants to kickstart a fresh international push to deal with Somalia. On a recent visit to the East African country, International Development Secretary Andrew Mitchell said a new, stronger approach to dealing with what he described as the root causes and effects of the problems it faces had to be agreed at a high-level conference which is being held in London on February the 23rd. Mitchell set out plans for the UK to increase aid to Somalia, which will include funding more police training, a tougher judicial system, and providing jobs for young men. And last week, William Hague became the first British Foreign Secretary to visit Somalia. During his trip, he said that we need more effective action to disrupt the terrorism and piracy which are such a serious threat to international security and the lives of people, including British nationals. The UK sees Somalia as a direct threat to its security. It fears that British nationals have joined Al-Shabaab fighters, a group which Western governments say have ties with Al-Qaeda. And the government has sought to link the giving of international aid to the UK's national interest, and this latest initiative seems to be part of that strategy.
With me to discuss this is Mahamud Sheikh Dalmar, who's the former BBC World Service's voice of Mogadishu. Welcome to the programme. We also have Duale Yusuf, who chairs the Somali Youth Project and the Peace in the Horn organisation. Thanks for being on the show. Finally, we have a guest on the phone, Mohamed Elmi, and we'll be talking to him later. Mohamed, first of all, what do you make of the UK's initiative here?
Well, I think the UK has got a lot of experience, in tackling problems, particularly in African states where others have failed or seems to have failed. We all remember that, the problem of Rhodesia with Ian Smith's regime, continued for almost, a decade and a half. The Americans tried, the UN tried, the Organization of African Unity, the predecessor of the AU, tried, and all seem to have failed. And at the right moment, I think, where the Conservative government of Mrs. Thatcher, with I think it was Lord Carrington as Foreign Secretary, took the lead and made, something out of a seemingly intractable mess at the time. Sierra Leone is another case where, where the British seem to have succeeded where others have failed. But I think, where we have to be very careful here. In Somalia, because we, take the view that, we put everything in one basket, that everything, in the Somali territories is, a failure. There are parties of the, what was once the unitary state of Somalia that are more peaceful and more successful and have even experimented, with all kinds, of parliamentary, political process with, a relatively good measure of success.
Okay. Well,
here, I think we have to define what is meant by, a strong approach. Is it military intervention, which the most powerful country on earth, the United States, tried and failed. Is it trying, to bring the antagonists, together in a more, subtle and the way the British are very adept in doing? We have to be very clear about that.
Okay. Duale, Yusuf, first reactions. Do you think that when they say strong approach, as Mahamud was just saying, do you think they're tending towards military intervention, or do you think they're tending towards something else, and will it work?
I think Britain might be trying to intervene in Somalia with the British, with a military intervention, and that might cause havoc and more death, as we see in Iraq and Afghanistan. If Britain intend, as the Foreign Secretary called it, his visit in Mogadishu, and my visit is a sign that the British has a commitment to the people and the country of Somalia. If that word is true, then we'll be fine. I mean, if they welcome to the all Somali people in the same place and big conference in Mogadishu, in Hargeisa, in Bosaso, that would be good. But if it is military intervention, it could be like Iraq, it can be like Afghanistan. More people will die. As we see, Somalia has been suffering over 21 years. And last intervention of Ethiopia created of death of 25 to 30,000 Somalians in Mogadishu and displaced over 2.5 million people, who now is scattered all around the country and create this famine which we have witnessed last year. Thousands of Somali children have lost their lives. And what we see, the saddest thing is the TFG, the Somali government, has never considered, have never concerned about the death of these young children dying in front of the camera of international. And that was really saddest things. Another thing, the intervention of Ethiopia and Kenya are not now helping any process of peace process or stability in Somalia. So what we are requesting, if Britain wants to intervene in Somalia, is to tell Ethiopia to pull out their troops and the Kenyans to pull out their troops and create, peace. Otherwise, the hostility will continue. And as far as we know, every nation have right to defend their country. If Britain, invaded by Russians or China, how the British people will act? I'm sure they will take their arms, regardless of their government. If the government does not protect the country, it means people will recognize this government does not.
Okay, well, let me just bring in Mohamed Elmi from the Somalia Diaspora UK. Welcome to the programme. What's your initial reaction when you hear this? I mean, Duale Yusuf just read out the words of William Hague, but there are many people in many parts of the world that have heard that from UK foreign secretaries over the years. Should we welcome it, or are you sceptical?
Well, thank you for having me on the programme. I mean, let's just clear the air. I think the UK government, the way we see it, in the majority of the Somali people, wherever they are, whether it's in the diaspora or those people in back home, I think the UK government renewed involvement in Somalia was partly inspired by the trouble suffering of our own people. And for over 2 decades, and the global spillover effects of the Somali conflict in terms of piracy, in terms of tourism, in terms of hunger. And the UK government involvement in Somalia heavily now, that shows a clear signal that the UK government are interested to help the people of Somalia. And the visit that Mr. William Hague, the Foreign Secretary of Britain, for almost 2 decades, and the outcome of that visit to appoint ambassador of Somalia since 21 years, that shows a clear signal that the international community that they should follow, and there should be a good example. One of the leading countries in the world should stand now and now have sympathy to bring the Somali people together. That's what I see in my point of view.
Okay. Mahamud, why do you think now, after such a long period of time, there is a sudden kind of initiative from the British?
Well, I think, Britain, as the Foreign Secretary and other his colleagues in the cabinet, made clear, see Somalia as one of the sources of threats to the UK itself. And that's quite, clear. When one, considers that, some people who are born or bred here joined, the Shabab, and started, killing, people there. And even the extremist ideologies, were embraced by people like Shabab, have actually made their way into the UK. We all remember what happened, where after 7/7, 2 weeks later, 21st of July 2005, that some people from the Horn of Africa, purportedly Somalis, although most of them were not Somalis, but that brought, near the fact that, the threats or trouble is going on in distant, seemingly distant places on earth can now affect us here. On the other hand, I think the British are more experienced when it comes to solving or trying to solve such problems in Africa because of their long-standing, historical, colonial, whatever relationship in the area. We all remember that, it was only after the defeat of Italy in the Second World War that the whole lump of Somali territories, except Djibouti, which is now an independent state, came under British rule. It was only then that, where mature political activity, like, establishing political parties and all that started. I'm not sure whether the current generation of British leaders are, as adept or as experienced as their, predecessors, some 5 or 6 decades ago. But I think there is a real concern that if something is not done now, something worse even than Shabab in the British and Western view could emerge out of that country. And I think the British, with their fine, political intuitions, are now sensing that the Somalis themselves, especially in the territories where suffering has been going on for the past 21 years, are now more ready and ripe than ever before for a political solution. How that political solution can come about is anybody's guess. What should be done about, the Shabab? What should be done or could be done about the multiplicity of presidents and what they call regional authorities, which most of the time are just, clans vying for influence and political gains in these territories. So it's not, an easy task. It's an uphill task, but let us see what comes out of it.
Duale, I mean, even if we were to grant, as Mahamud said, that the British have the skills that you suggest, and some people might say they also have a skill of mucking it up, but in the colonial, in their previous colonial territories. But even if we accept their goodwill, isn't this something which has more fundamental problems than something that the British are able to do even with goodwill? Isn't there more fundamental economic and structural problems here that aren't going to be dealt with by the kind of initiative that we've heard from the British?
Okay. If that case, fine. But what we see, there are a lot of foreign intervention in Somalia, especially Ethiopia and Kenya, who are now oppressing thousands of Somalians. And the more people don't see, if the Britain went to its own, yes, it's a Western world, powerful. But what you see, the Kenyans and the Ethiopians invading and damaging, the sovereign of Somalia every day, killing innocent lives every day, labeling terrorists. That is not going to help with the foreign, the British intervention in Somalia. If the Britain intend to speak to the Somalis and tell the Ethiopian bullets, leave the Somalis, we are here as a Western powerful and we want to establish peace, that would be fine. Many Somalis believe that it's going to happen. But as long as the foreign troops remain in Mogadishu, creating havoc and killing every day in Mogadishu, and Ethiopian invading part of it and killing some lives, as we have seen, Ethiopian killed for the last few weeks over nearly 50 and injured over hundreds. And the international community are not talking about the death of Somalis. The Kenyans are committing the crime, genocide in the Kismayo area now. They're not killing Al-Shabaab. Shabaab is a part of the Somalian. I'm not defending them. But it's not the violence, to create the violence and bombing. It's not going to change. We need a dialogue with those who hold in the power, holding the fire. And we have to sit as a Somalian together in the same place. If Al-Shabaab says, I'm not going to say to anybody, and then the Somalian have rights to fight them, not the British or not the Kenyans or not the Ethiopians, because this territory, this country belongs to the Somali people. And the only solution can come from the minds and the hearts and the will of Somalis.
Mohamed Elmi, let me bring you back into the conversation. Do you think that the security issues which Mahamud has identified as being the motivating factor for this British initiative, do you think that by pursuing an intervention designed to deal with those issues, that the British will fail to deal with the full range of problems that need to be addressed? And would they be capable of dealing with those even if they had a mind to?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't think so now. There was a lot of speculations here in wider Somali society, wherever they are, and saying that I have been even myself clear at air and been interviewed wider Somali, media in UK, which, I mean, I'm not sure whether you heard even yourself or not. They were saying that non-paper article wrote that Italians and UK joined together, has wrote that Somalia, they will be putting back to when the transitions finish on 21st August, that the Somali will be held and will be ruled African president and will be appointed a prime minister from the minority group, and that the Somali will be held under of UN and AU. I mean, there's a lot of speculation and people, they're talking themselves, but we have to be wise enough. We living in a world that everybody in the morning read newspapers, and I have contacted the FCO, Foreign Commonwealth Office in UK, and they confirm me personally in my position as a chairman of Somali Diaspora UK in here, and it's my duty to contact and clarify this issue, and they confirm, the Foreign Commonwealth Office, that there is nothing letter came out from Foreign Commonwealth Office regards to the Somali will be intervention. Somali will be absolutely holding back for 1 year. And also, I have contacted the Somali ambassador to Rome, Mr. Noor, and I think he has been confirmed that when I was speaking to him, he was even our ambassador, Dr. Duale, he was with him, and they confirmed, both of them, that they have been sit down with the foreign affairs of ministers of and Minister of Interior, Minister of Defense, and including the Prime Minister of Italy, and then they confirmed that there's nothing. All this is speculation. It's full of it's false letter. And let's come back to reality. I mean, we all agree that the conference of UK that holding in February 23rd, coming up in 2 weeks' time, I think it aims purely to raise international support from the Somali security and justice sectors. And we understand that ourselves, that we are realistic enough.
Mohamed, yeah, thanks very much for that point. I just want to put that point actually to Mahmoud. So, I mean, there is a danger here, isn't there, that in pursuing the security goals, kind of narrowly compared to anything else that might be necessary to assist the Somali population, that the British intervention will end up, in fact, dividing and ruling, that it may, for instance, produce a situation where the Al-Shabaab are not regarded as a legitimate part of any discussion?
Well, the problem is this has been going on for the southern part of what was the Somali Republic for the past 21 years. Before that, we had a military dictatorship that also ruled for 21 years. In that period, spanning almost more than 4 decades, a lot of natural grown things in other parts of the world, that where new crop of leaders, new idea, was absolutely absent. And I think the problems are so diverse and so intractable that one country's intervention could make no difference at all. On the other hand, we are not exactly sure about where the aims of the British government, what it's aiming at. Is it for just raising awareness internationally of what's going on there and what has been going on there, and soliciting by the aid and assistance of other nations. The Arab countries, the oil-rich Gulf countries, tried with their money to sort out these things. They failed. The Americans came, with a massive military force, failed. The Ethiopians, everybody seems. And it is just, a confluence of factors that led the Somalis to this, quagmire. And it could not be tackled, realistically, in a 2-day conference in London.
Absolutely.
I think this is just, trying to focus the attention of the world once more on what's going on there. And I think the British and the Western countries in general are interested in Somalia basically for geopolitical and strategic reasons. Fighting and eliminating the influence of the Islamists spearheaded by Shabab, and also tackling this intractable problem of the piracy, which has become, something that seems to be, insoluble.
Well, on that,
if they concentrate on only these topics, then nothing will change, I think.
Well, Mahamud, Sheikh, Dalmar, thank you very much for bringing us to the end of that discussion, and to my other guests, to Duale, Yusuf and to Mohamed Elmi, who joined us on the phone. We'll be discussing a different issue in the second half of the programme, the whole debate over immigration. I hope you'll stick with us and rejoin us in part 2.